Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, Secure Revenue Success with a Better UX. My name is Rafa Halawi, and I'm the campaign manager at 3 Pillar Global. I wanted to go through some housekeeping items before we get started. All attendees are muted throughout the webinar, but we'd love to hear from you. This is an interactive session, so please type your questions in the questions box on your control panel, and the presenters will be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link to the recording in the next day or two. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Gary Wu, Product Strategy and Design at 3 Pillar Global. Gary, over to you.
Thank you, Rafa. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar's title is Secure Revenue Success with a Better UX. So today's 1 hour long webinar really has to do with the combination of security and UX. You know, oftentimes we find that maybe security and UX are competing, but it doesn't have to be. And we realized this when we achieved that balance in our partnership with Hypori, an enterprise secure mobility management company. I'll let the experts tell you more about that company, but to start off, before I introduce our panelists for today, I'd like to start off with a poll question. That's right, we do like interactive webinars, so definitely choose answers, pick answers, and chime in on the chat as well. So first question is, what's more important when building security products? Choose one of the following: functionality, aesthetics. Functionality, 100%. All right, great, thank you. All right, so let's see. Back to here. So y'all picked, the results were 100% functionality when building cybersecurity products. We believe at Hypori and 3 Pillar in our partnership that we did achieve a balance between functionality and aesthetics. So the answer that wasn't in the question was possibly both. And so we'll dive into that a little bit today. Before we get into that, though, I'd like to introduce the panel. I'm going to start off with Heather Combs. She is the Chief Operating Officer at 3 Pillar Global. Today, she oversees marketing, business development, and operations to create revenue acceleration strategies that continue to drive double-digit growth. Before this, she was actually our Chief Revenue Officer, so she has experience in that area as well. Heather, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about 3 Pillar?
Thanks, Gary. Absolutely. So 3 Pillar builds breakthrough software products that power other digital businesses. So we're a professional services company that helps other companies realize their dream. We provide product strategy, management, user experience, architecture, engineering, whatever you need to really go full life cycle, bringing a product to life. Specifically, we try to partner with our clients to support their business outcomes, the things they're trying to drive toward to make sure that the product they take to market fulfills its promise. And that's exactly what we're striving to do when we worked with Hypori, and I think it's a great story of how it comes together.
Great, thank you, Heather. All right, speaking of Hypori, I'd like to introduce Sebastian Shavandi. He is the Chief Revenue Officer at Hypori. He's a subject matter expert in cybersecurity and enterprise secure mobility management. In the last 15 years, he's been spending his career in Fortune companies such as Dell and Bell Auto Electric. Sebastian, would you tell us a little bit about Hypori, its value proposition, and the challenge you faced that led us to our partnership?
Yeah, good morning. So just to start off, Hypori is a highly secure virtualized smartphone that enables essentially business users to allow access to corporate data to their employees while keeping the data secure and off the device, as well as providing 100% separation between the device and the corporate data. You know, we are being used in many different places, from healthcare to the Department of Defense, where security is obviously very important, and it's always in front of everyone's thoughts, right? So one of the things that we needed to do is not just make the product work really well and secure, but make it attractive enough where users can really connect with that product and really have that ease of access and ease of usability that they need to make it a little bit more interactive for them, and for them to be able to utilize it the way they need. Hence, we partnered up with 3Pillar to achieve that.
Great, thank you, Sebastian. I will tell you that I personally enjoyed working with Hypori and learning all about secure mobility, and I think it's really cool stuff. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Mike. Mike Hedman is the Director of Software Engineering at Hypori. Mike leverages over 20 years of experience in designing, developing, and implementing strategic and business-driven IT solutions. All that to say that he's a super smart guy. So Mike, could you tell us a little about your role in this 3Pillar and Hypori engagement?
Yeah, so my role was the primary point of contact between Hypori and 3Pillar, helped determine the scope of work that they would be doing the designs around, as well as the boundaries, where we wanted them to go, the areas we wanted to cover, including making sure we had developers, architects available for them to interview, our frontline admins being able to be interviewed throughout the whole 3Pillar process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Mike, I really enjoyed working with you closely on this engagement. And I was hoping to sort of tell the story of our engagement with some before and after photos. And maybe we can talk to them. So I have one ready, teed up just for you here. And this is the admin console for Hypori before the Hypori and 3Pillar engagement. I was hoping maybe you can talk to this a little bit. You know, I learned a lot, you know, from the interviews, but you're the expert here.
Not quite the expert, but one of the things about our admin console, being a small Austin startup company, we didn't have the luxury of having a full-time UI UX designer in-house. And so there was a lot of organic growth into developing the admin console. It was written by engineers, and they themselves will readily admit they are not UX, UI experts. And so what we have is many years of building on top of some old technologies and older design patterns for UI. And it just got to a point where being able to easily navigate through the system to add users, there were multiple entry and exit points, and you had to kind of know how it worked before you got started in on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we did when we first started off was, you know, I got a chance to talk to your developers who developed this, also your sysadmins. And in our world, in the UX, we call it formative research, right? To better understand how it's used, like you mentioned, what are the entry points, but also dig into the architecture of how as you see here, a Hypori device is constructed and composed. Which is super exciting for me. So I think that, you know, the way that we approached this was, let's learn everything about how this works, and then identify some pain points that we could target, and, you know, deliver some research findings to you and the team, and then triage what makes the most sense to tackle. Yeah,
and a lot of that came from those interviews, as well as because we don't always necessarily get to see in the day and the life of an admin user of Hypori. And so they, dealing with it every day, they feel certain pain points in the whole process that we just did not know necessarily existed.
Yeah, no, it was really exciting for us to talk to your admins. They're extremely passionate about the mission. So I'm gonna go to the next slide to showcase a little bit of what we ended up with. As you can tell, the visuals are drastically different, right? You see a dark mode. There was a light mode as well, right, Mike? We delivered a light mode as well. But aside from the aesthetics, what we did was we took the research findings from the research that we did in the beginning of the interviews, and then we were able to construct a better information architecture layout. So better information architecture, which groups information in the right way. Maybe that's a little bit easier to consume. So even if this was black and white, I mean, if you recall, we started off with like hand sketches with
wireframes. Yeah.
My illegible handwriting, right?
Yeah.
And we evolved it. We evolved the functionality before we, put the aesthetics on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
yes.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask how is this working out for you?
So it's working very well. We have hired a front-end engineer to start implementing these designs, and he's pretty much been able to take directly from your designs, the high fidelity designs, the CSS, and implement them. We're using React as our framework, and he's able to convert those flows very quickly. If we didn't have this design, he himself has said that we would just still have boxes and circles on the screen. And so by having a high fidelity roadmap of the workflows of where the data should exist on the page, and he's able to take that and convert it into a working admin console.
Gotcha. Yeah, and one of the things too is that in our formative research, we found that the metric of time on task was important because it would take a sysadmin, a certain a lengthy amount of time to make changes to some of your devices. And one of the things that we tried to do in our designs was to reduce that amount of time so it frees up your admin's time to do sort of higher level things.
Yep.
So that was one of the goals.
Yep. Being able to keep track of expired licenses and spending, additional time just on more tasks. They're much more efficient with this workflow.
Mm-hmm. Right. So after we finished this, we actually went back to the research findings, and originally it was the scope was really just the admin console, but then after we completed it, we said, hey, actually you said, hey, maybe you should tackle the user onboarding process.
Yep.
So I'm gonna go to the next slide to showcase sort of what it was before, and I'm going to let you kind of talk to that as well.
Yeah, so the user onboarding, again, it was pretty simple, but there was a whole lot of back and forth. We had to have our tier 2 support was very hands-on when we're onboarding new users to the system. They fill out a form. There's emails and accounts that have to be set up just to be able to get the request in. And that actually speaks to one of the things you found that you can speak to in your interviews is the end users were very high touch, had to be walked through the whole system step by step. And so that took up a lot of the admin's time in order to help those new users. And that just certainly wasn't scalable when we're looking at onboarding 1,000 users, 10,000 users, 100,000 users to the Hypori system.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I think that when we heard that you were going to onboard 100,000 users, we sort of looked at this process and went, okay, we are going to try to make this as efficient as possible, reduce the amount of friction as possible to get your users onboarded. So the pictures that you see here are ones that I captured during our research. So we tested this original onboarding process with 7 participants, and only one of them were able to complete the onboarding process successfully. So that's 14% success rate without intervention from someone else like myself or a sysadmin. So we had a 14% success rate. Now, I will say your dev team are rock stars because we delivered this 14% and the details behind the 14% success rate to your dev team, and they were literally in less than 4 hours, on it to make things changes. And to the audience, even though the new onboarding process might not be completely implemented yet, they have made changes already really quickly to improve that success rate. So kudos to your dev team, Mike, there.
The dev team and the admins, they took a few unnecessary steps out of the whole process, and that just made it a lot easier for our end users.
Yeah, that's what we like, is doing things that are minimizing the time to value, so that you can actually improve efficiencies on the as quickly as possible. So that's awesome. All right. So while the dev and the sysadmins were working iteratively on sort of the current state, we had the opportunity to look at the future. So we approached it as, let's take, reducing the time to onboard and as a metric, and also reducing the amount of intervention that a user has to get onboarded. So what we came up with was in iteration in collaboration with you, Mike, and your team, was sort of an approach where a user is going to get introductions, a super clean introduction to Hypori, direct them to the app, and then go ahead and let them onboard completely on their mobile device, basically. In some cases, depending on security levels and things like, and depending on who your client is, you might have a few extra steps here and there, but overall, we're trying to streamline it.
Yeah, the idea is around this is to make customers self-sufficient, self-serving. They can self-manage their own device and be able to, be able to get up and running with minimal contact.
Yes, yeah, and we had a lot of fun doing this. We when we did the user testing for this, we found 100% success, and the best comment that we got was, "Wow, this is just like what I expected." Right? For an onboarding process, that's pretty good. That's as best as you can possibly get. Is like, I don't want to deal with this onboarding and usernames and passwords, but it's what I expect. It works, and it's easy. So that's positive. What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to mention that some of the actually all the design decisions that we were making were driven by some of the metrics that we were trying to drive down, as I mentioned earlier, which was reducing the time and friction for a user to onboard, as well as the reducing the amount of support tickets, right? To just lift the load off of your sysadmins in your tier 1, tier 2. So I'd like to ask the audience right now, and our next poll question is, what are the most important metrics for measuring product success? So select one of the following: number of new users, average daily user count, number of support tickets, revenue or deals won, and of course, there's an other on this one. I feel like we need one of those elevator music songs. Oh, here we go. Okay, so the results came back, and it looks like we've got 10% says number of users, 60% said average daily user count, number of support tickets 0%. Okay, revenue deals won 50%. That makes sense. And then other 20%. Hey, for those who put other, drop in the chat. What is that other metric? We definitely want to hear from you. So at this point, I want to shift gears just a little bit. I'm gonna no longer stop presenting because we have no more pictures to show you from our designs. If you want to know more about the engagement and the tactical pieces of it, Mike and I are happy to jam with you at any time over LinkedIn or whatever venue you want. So because we have plenty to talk about, but we only have an hour. So I like to shift gears a little bit, and I want to bring in Sebastian. Sebastian, you saw the poll results. What about for you? What are the important metrics for you as a CRO when you go out into the market, demonstrate the value of Hypori?
I think all of the poll, the kind of options that were on the poll are important, except, I would say all of the above. But from a sales perspective, one of the things that's really important to us is, especially when we're doing a demo for a potential customer, is the wow factor, right? Wow factor is what really makes the customer like the product, be attracted to the product, and find themselves being able to use that product in a way where it reduces our sales cycle, right? So that being said, once the sale is done, in a SaaS world where we play, the product has a 30-day referral cycle as well, right? Meaning within that first 30 days of customers using it, the wow factor has to extend so they can actually be able to refer us to other potential users and other customers. That being said, that's where the kind of the UX and the interface comes in. One thing to add that Michael and you were talking about earlier is the amount of time it takes to onboard. When within our customers today, even with the potential customers that we talk to, we give them demo accounts to try and play with and use. If that onboarding is painful, it basically sets the kind of the baseline of what the rest of the product kind of is. So coming back to it, it's important all around, because every aspect of that is measurable from one different side of the business, to another.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the audience members actually said all the lists could be potential metrics for success. They are dependent on the KPIs you set. So it sounds like the audience member here, we don't have a name for it, unfortunately, for right now, but it sort of echoes what you're talking about, right? Great, awesome. So Heather, I want to pull you into the conversation right now about sort of the metrics as well, and talking about it from a C-level perspective. From a UX perspective, it's often common for UX designers like myself to use metrics and analytics to drive some design decisions. Like I've said, in a lot of the designs with Hypori, we're looking at, here's the metric we want to drive to, because that's what's linked to the business. I want to ask you, how have you seen metrics used to make decisions at the C-level?
I think, so I don't think it's terribly different, but I think sometimes they're elevated up one notch. So in this role, we might be talking about growth rate or profitability and the EBITDA. We might be talking about brand equity and our all-important NPS score. And I think that translates in the product conversations to things like new digital subscriptions as a measure of growth, or repeat users as a measure of profitability, certainly not the same startup cost as you expand your user base. Client referrals rather than the NPS score or an attributing factor. And certainly for many of our the companies that we're seeing and helping with, they're looking to move customers from like a single event to a subscription model or a membership model, so that rather than one-time revenue, they're looking at ongoing and sustainable revenue. So those are the kinds of things I think that are, they have equivalencies, you just hear them talked about slightly different, and growth instead of new subscriptions.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I think it's really interesting that you point out sort of the conversion from events to membership or subscriptions. The different revenue models that you can implement for, I guess, different companies, and the decisions you have to make on that as you look at your product as well. Sebastian, how does that track with you on the Hypori side?
100%. I think Heather was right on point there. One more thing I'd like to kind of add to that, and it's a different way of saying it, the same thing that she said about growth, is attrition rate, right? So how many new renewals do we get? How do we lose customers and why, right? Generally, it's either the product or the product experience or the customer experience on the back end of the support. Those are really important as well, because every year in the SaaS world, we're seeing, we're measuring that, and we're basically calculating that, which is obviously a direct reflection on growth as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's competition comes up quick, and you gotta keep on keeping. Okay, great. Heather, my next question probably is for you. So you've gone from the CRO at 3Pillar, responsible for growing revenue for the company, and now you're the COO, now responsible for company operations. How has your decision making changed now that you shifted to a new role?
I don't think it's changed terribly. I think my job's a little bit less fun than it once was. I think
Heather.
Sebastian's got all the fun. You still get to go to events and meet customers, get out there, which is one of the best parts. But I think the ideas are the same. We make all of our decisions based on our core ideology, our corporate vision, the strategic growth of the company. We're fast growing and we want to serve clients well. But I think maybe where it's shifted just a little bit is that rather than being entirely client focused, now I spend some of the time building things like the processes and the systems and the people behind the scenes that help support that growth. But in doing so, I think that we're always focused on making the decisions that make an investment worth the return. So that we are, just like in the UX on this product, we're making sure that we spend our time, money, resources in a way that turns back success and profitability and happy clients to the company. I think that the CRO role is super important here. The COO role makes sense here, and probably a missing part of the conversation is the CFO role. I think that when we're talking about either internal operations and investments and that return, that's an important role, but on products too. I think getting the CFO on board with a new way of thinking, that products are never done, that you have a line item for ongoing development rather than a fixed price, fixed scope project that's going to be finished when you're done. I mean, Mike, are you ever going to be done with this product?
No, and that's part of the growth is being able to adjust and anticipate and project out where I need my developers to be working on the next feature that's coming up for our customers, whether it's more on the security side or ease of use side. It is a never-ending job, which is good.
It's good for job security, but you certainly have to budget for it differently, right?
Yes, yeah, you do, and you have lots of unanticipated requests that come in, especially for a small company like Hypori. We have demands coming into us from different customers, and it's a balancing act between which demands, which requests do we fulfill and work on next.
Yeah. That's, Heather, I like that you brought up CFO because oftentimes as a tactical UX designer, I generally don't think about the CFO that much because I leave it up to people like Heather and Sebastian to talk to the CFO. But in reality, we do have to make sure everyone's on the same page, right? And so in that same vein, though, there are things that, as a UX designer like myself, there are things that I try to propose that I think is super low-hanging fruit that requires, I think, zero investment. And then Mike's gonna tell me like, Gary, you're nuts. Like, of course it requires an investment, but I think that it's sort of a zero investment if you already have a zero development investment, if you already have the UX investment put into it, which is some of the things that I often propose is like basic usability stuff, like the font sizing, the type, the spacing, the overall layout of the information, grouping similar information together, some shortcuts that make it easier for experts to navigate through the platform. And those are the things that I lob over to someone like Michael and get, Mike, you good? Like, this is easy, right?
Yeah, it's not always easy, but one of the advantages we have here with your design is that, and Hypori as a company chose, to do a ground up redesign. But the way we're building it on top of your designs is building a solid foundation so that in the future we can have those low-hanging fruits. For example, you talked about the dark mode earlier in the admin console. We have a light mode as well. Some people like the dark black background, some like the light. The way we built it out, if somebody came up with another color scheme, maybe they have a couple of installs and they want to change the background for each different install of Hypori in their on-prem solution. They could then know I'm on this version of Hypori, I'm on that version. If I change the background, we can easily implement that just by applying a new CSS template. Whereas in the old system, the old admin console, you were kind of set in that design. There is no templating, there is no changing the design style for that system. It is what it is. Things like consolidating the info around users, consolidating the info around apps and stuff that are a part of the system. It's always, the design showed up as always being on the right-hand side. So you get that muscle memory. I click some entry in a table, I know on the right-hand side that the detailed information is going to show up in that panel. And so it helps that ease of workflow and similarity working through the system. It makes learning the system much easier because you're not bouncing around nearly as much. And building that around reusable components, such as a generic table that has built-in sorting and stuff. It doesn't matter what the data is loaded into it versus having a custom table built for each type of item and you have no reusability.
Yeah, I oftentimes think about it this way. From what I heard in your description of sort of from a dev perspective, I heard one, got to have a good foundation. Got to have a good foundation in the design so that you can build on top of it or extend it. So extensibility, reusability, I'm using dev terms now, but they're also applicable to the UX world. And so it seems like by setting a good foundation, we're able to make things like grouping the information together to make it more usable, easier to do.
Yep, much easier to do, much easier to implement and design. And that's one of the reasons why when we were discussing the options that 3Pillar presented before the project even started, is determining, do we need the high fidelity versions or not? And we didn't have a front-end engineering team at all at the time. It was dedicated to building this out. And so we decided to go that extra step and have the high fidelities because that gave us a lot more solid foundations for beginning the development as we built that team out and hired on developers for it.
Yeah, sure. And you talk about all these things that or because of the final designs. Well, certainly y'all did make an investment in UX, right?
Yes.
Y'all we partnered together and you did make an investment in UX. And that's thanks to the company and the leadership. And now you're in a better place in terms of building a foundation that's extensible and supports your growth. So that rolls into our third polling question, which is how likely is your leadership to invest in user experience? Very likely. Someone likely, not likely. UX designers get this a lot, is that UX is just Oh, awesome. Look at that. It's very likely they see the value in user experience, 43%. Somewhat likely they will need some convincing, 57%. So more on the side of somewhat likely, but not likely is 0%, which is good to hear. That people don't think that UX is just a bunch of fluff.
That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so hitting on the somewhat likely needs some convincing. I want to now ask the C-level people on this call, Heather and Sebastian, what are the top 3 things maybe you need to hear at the C-level to make an investment in UX if you were in the seat of another company, let's say? Heather, let's start with you.
I'd want to know ROI. What do you think the return on that particular investment is going to bring? And what I'm hoping is that you're going to have answers that show growth and differentiation. So how is this going to help us serve our clients better, which is going to attract even more clients to this use? And specifically, how much are you going to spend in order to do that?
Yeah. Okay. What about Sebastian, from your perspective?
I think Heather covered it, but yeah, I mean, from on the sales side, I would say how much does it make my sales guys' lives easier, right? So how much does it make it easier for them to be able to not just demonstrate and have the customer fall in love with the product, and obviously, it result in the sale, But at the end of the day, we all have to respond to the question that the CFO asks of how much is it going to cost and what's the ROI, as Heather mentioned. So that's always going to be top of mind.
Yeah.
I do think Sebastian is absolutely right that there are some qualitative aspects to this, that a better looking product is easier to take to market. It's easier to excite, as you said, the sales team. It's easier to excite the market to write about the product, to talk about it, to find those referrals where one person passes it to the next. So he's absolutely right. As much as I kid about only the money and the ROI, there is absolutely a qualitative component to really great design.
Okay, yeah. I like how there's like CRO, COO, CRO, taking off the hat, putting on a different hat. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. Okay, great. So we have, Sebastian and Heather share some things that at the C level you need to hear to make an investment in UX, and we talked about sort of drawing the line between the UX work and getting that UX done and implemented into the product, and drawing a line all the way up to C level, looking at the bottom line, right? Even the CEO of the company is thinking about that. So we certainly can sort of see the up and down, right? The whole company, from the tactical to Michael and his team, actually putting it into code and getting it out there, to Sebastian taking it out to the market and being able to build more revenue, have more deals won. So I think that that we certainly see that from a security and UX or product and UX perspective for our partnership, we were able to strike that balance. That's why I think that we have this webinar today, is that we wanted to showcase that you can have that balance between security and UX. You can have form and function and aesthetics on top of it, with the cherry on top, right? And actually have it drive the bottom line in both quantitative and qualitative ways. I think, Sebastian, you mentioned that earlier. So at this point, I want to open it up to questions. In fact, I want to really tackle one question that came in a little earlier because it's really relevant. The question was, development is oftentimes the largest cost of a project and the biggest focus for clients, e.g., it needs to work first, then be pretty. How have you educated teams, clients about the importance and impact that UX has for the project and the bottom line? So I'm going to take the beginning part of this, and then I'm going to pass it over to y'all to get your perspective. From a UX perspective, you did see that our final results were pretty. They were high five. There was a dark mode and a light mode, and there was gradients and shading and all that. But guess what, right? Michael and I talked about this. We started off with wireframes that were sketches, that were hand sketches, that were my ugly sketches. Don't get me wrong, I'm a designer, but I'm not a visual designer, right? So we focus on the make it work first, and making it work means sometimes, hey, there are 20 features, maybe the users only need 5, right? The Pareto chart, right? So that from a UX perspective, it's not just making it pretty, but also what is the right function. So, and then I'm going to take, so that's my perspective from the UX perspective. I'm going to pass it over to maybe Sebastian. Maybe you can talk about the education piece.
Yeah, so education is always ongoing, right? So because there's a spend, and as this question came up, there's a cost center kind of aspect of it. But what really has to resonate is that communication, that contact between development, sales, and the leadership side of business to really understand what that value is, right? Customer expectations have gone higher. Now, if you would look at cybersecurity products, 10, 12 years ago, they said there's some really good stuff out there, but their user interface is just, unless you're an engineer, you're not going to really care, right?
Yeah.
I think even system admins are doing more with less, meaning you can't be an engineer and a subject matter expert at every product that comes out, but it has to be so intuitive that you can easily use it and integrate it into the other products you're using, right? So I think that feedback that you get from sales from customers, essentially through sales, through your engineering group, through your system admins, can all go back up to the leadership and really reflect on, okay, does this product, am I embarrassed of selling this product, or am I proud of selling this product, right? So it's not just the functionality, but the look and feel of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Heather, Mike,
Yep.
Thoughts on education?
I think there's a couple of things that go into that education, and one is realizing that when you start out with, like what we did with 3Pillar, is we started out with those interviews, we started out with a very low level design and just working on flows, going from one step to the next, one item to the next, and just kind of, whiteboarding the idea of what's the ideal workflow for an admin. Starting with that gets you to a point where you have the ability to make it pretty on top. If you ignore those kind of workflows and you just work on it from a pure functional standpoint, you're going to spend a lot more money down the line trying to refactor both that admin console or that product to make those workflows better. And that's kind of what we had to do. We couldn't, and so that's why we brought in 3Pillar. We weren't able to refactor our old admin console and system to have better flows, so we decided to start fresh. And that having that UX and those workflows designed out early on in the process makes the developers more efficient, and then makes the product more efficient, and makes ultimately the admins more efficient. If your admins are sitting there spending a ton of time onboarding a customer, they're not maintaining the rest of the system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree with you 100%. I want to get Heather's take on this too, because at 3Pillar we do a lot of that education because we work with a lot of different clients, right? And not everyone is on the same page as far as what UX and product can do for a company. Heather, do you have any stories or any ideas on education?
Well, I think the piece that I'm hearing in there that I would highlight is that you can't overestimate how important it is to get real user feedback. Way too many clients over time have either brought a product to us or have tried to build a product without actually testing it in the field and with real users. And we've found that, if you go out and really talk to users or really let them play with it, almost every time it starts building in the right direction itself. And being willing to do that iterative process along the way while you're getting it it'll save you a lot of time and trouble in the end. We certainly have heartbreaking stories of very expensive products that have been built that have never launched or have launched to absolute thuds in the market, with clients who then came back and said, what are we going to do about it? And we're either scrapping the entire original and rebuilding, or we're trying to take that to a whole next place. So I would say invest up from the beginning and all the way through on your user research.
Yeah. So whenever you say that, I just think of one of our product mindset principles, which is solve for need. We actually wrote a book on how to do it. So check that out. It's something that I think I sort of work with that framework, and I certainly always ask people to put this in front of users and get their reaction to it, not just their verbal feedback, but also their visceral, and Sebastian, like you said earlier, their emotional feedback to a product. So that's actually, I'm going to lead into a question for Sebastian. I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit because it's a little bit it's a lengthier question that came in from the audience here. Is that you mentioned earlier, you alluded to the fact that there is some emotional response to product. Can you talk a little bit more about the qualitative and quantitative ROI? Just to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah. So I think Heather touched on that as well at the very beginning, right? So look, the qualitative is going to be things that you hear back from your sales team, things that trickle up from customers directly that tell you what was their experience with this product. As Heather just mentioned, right? You have to ask your customers what they feel about the product, especially first-time users. I'm a big proponent of asking. One is, when I go into a product, the very first time I look at a product, I try to pay attention to see how that makes me feel. Am I excited to look at this product? Am I excited to work with this product? Do I see myself using this product forever or for my day-to-day business or not? The other aspect of it is just getting feedback and saying, look, this is what the product is. You mentioned earlier, having too many features is not a good thing, right? Because if you have too many features, you're not going to be able to educate your customers on which ones to use. You have to go hit the top, 20% or 30% that's going to really solve the problem. And everything else is a nice add-on or a nice to have. One of the main things from a sales perspective is, look, how many deals do we lose due to, it's either going to be price, product, or the process, right? So how many deals do we lose because the product was clunky? I've actually heard a customer, a Fortune customer that we were talking to a while back, say the product is great from a security perspective, but it's clunky. And this was 3 years ago. We've come a long way since then. And that was a big kind of kickstart for us to really start looking into the experience the customer has, rather than just being a security product. As I mentioned, renewals. What is your attrition rate? How many customers are you really losing that are due to, hey, the product is good, but there's this other cool new thing that's out there? Products specs can be the same, the features can be the same, but who enjoys using your product more? That increases customer stickiness, in my opinion, as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. That I would love to hear that story one day, to like verbatim, just understand. From as a UX designer, I just love hearing just like the nitty gritty stories about the interaction between two different people. So it's fun.
I think, Gary, probably you have all kinds of stories of how, because at 3Pillar, we often work with products that are really in the market, that really our own employees are using. I mean, we were building for Park Mobile for a long time, and I often called the team with feedback from the field when it wouldn't remember my credit card, or when they were first doing it. So there really is this interaction that even the UX designers who are working on it get. We work with PBS and NPR, and I use both of those products daily with having kids, and with talking to Alexa in the morning on what the news is. And so I often have feedback, and they're getting it. I get hopefully the qualitative and quantitative side there from an insider real use case.
Yeah, Heather, that makes me think about a COO question, and it has to do with organization, right? How the organization is structured so that when, let's say, Michael goes out and uses Park Mobile, and it's like, oh man, I found a bug, because he's a developer, and he's like, this is not supposed to work this way. I know exactly how to fix it. I want to fix it right now. How can companies structure themselves so that they can be receptive to that kind of feedback?
It's a really good question. I think that you do need to make sure that you have good open feedback loops where you get that information and you're inviting constant updates. I mean, it would be interesting to know, like, Mike, how do you hear about that, or how do you give feedback when you run into it in a place? Now, I'm assertive, I'm a complete extrovert, and so I'm the first one to talk to someone about my experience, especially if asked. Like, I always tell people, don't ask if you don't want my opinion, because I'm sure whether it's relevant or not. But I think on the opposite side of the role, I look for any opportunity I have to get feedback from live customers, and especially if I have a secret shopper aspect. If somebody will call me and tell me what their experience was when they're not having to do it in front of anyone else whose feelings might be hurt or who might feel torn between the middle, I feel like that's when I get that, like, raw, really important feedback that we can act on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to add to that, one thing I've experienced in some products is leaving the feedback capability in the product, right? And if hey, if you ever have, and you tell customers, look, if you ever have feedback on any aspect of this product, just you can open up the app or the website or whatnot and just submit it. You can do it anonymously, or you can allow us to reach out to you. I think it's a really easy and good way of people like Heather and myself, who are fairly openly spoken about experiences of these things, to be able to report it, because there's nothing better than getting it directly from a customer on what they think we could do to make the product better. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that we're tending to, right? We have to make sure that they're happy with our product and it's solving their problem while making them, make them work less to be able to get there.
Yes. Interesting that you say Sebastian, the leaving the product feedback sort of functionality inside a product. I've definitely worked in places and worked on products where the functionality works great, but to what I was talking about earlier in terms of having an organization that supports it, is what happens when that's submitted, right? I've submitted some responses to provided feedback to products, and literally the next day I get a response back via email. It's like, hey Gary, thanks for the feedback. We're going to be putting this into our, onto the next iteration or the following iteration. Like, how good does that feel as a customer? Like, wow, I just pointed out something and they're fixing it. So it's the feedback loop, to your point, Heather, is very important in order to make that work. Yeah. All right. So we have another question here. My UX is a mess. Do you have a methodology for how to start? Yes, I do. I can take that one. A methodology for how to start. We talked a lot about this during this webinar, and it's talk to people, right? Talk to your users. In the case of Hypori, we were able to have individuals walk us through their tasks while we watch them. So there is a research methodology called contextual inquiry that I'm a huge fan of, because I'm able to get qualitative and quantitative data from it. It is a little bit more lengthy, but I can get a lot of meat out of it. And the process is, you have someone, let's say Michael's using a product, Michael's working through that product, and I, as a researcher, would watch him do it. So any type of mental muscle memory that he's established with the current product that he's found shortcuts for, that might not be efficient, I can watch him do it, and then I go, Michael, and I ask them, this is the inquiry part, Michael, why do you keep going over there to copy this over a bunch of times? And he'll tell me and say, well, because that's how it works, right? And so we find opportunities for improvement there. There's also opportunities where you're standing behind someone at their desk, and then you can see their desk are full of Post-it notes. And so while their UX is a mess on their screen, you should see their desk. And it is messy, not because they're a messy person, but because it's what they need to get their job done, which then opens up the door to say, your UX, your software product, your software product piece might be an opportunity, but you got to look at the bigger picture, which then lends to talking about business outcomes, right? Taking a look at, well, Sebastian, Heather, well, what are the goals of the organization, first of all? Then you can come down to, okay, let's change this button from blue to red, right? That stuff is inconsequential as long as it's towards that bottom line. Okay, next question we have here come up is, how do you know if your UX works? Let's see, Sebastian, you want to take that one?
Sure. One is they don't tell you it's clunky. So again, customer feedback is really important. Product adoption is very important. The wow factor, I keep saying that today, right? The wow factor is a big deal to me. When the customers first see your product, do they really get excited about it? Does it look, attractive enough that they can see themselves using it for a long time? We talked about the qualitative versus the quantitative. They're both aspects of measuring different parts of the UX and different functionalities of UX. But it all comes down to being paying attention, really looking into it and getting feedback, not just from your direct sales team and your marketing team and your organization yourself, but really getting feedback from customers that are using it and taking that and making something of it.
Yeah, Heather, you have any thoughts on this?
I would say, so in addition to that, go try to use it yourself. You know, it's unbelievable how often somebody doesn't do that, and how difficult it can be. Especially with a lot of product releases coming out, sometimes they change something and you don't realize the additional impacts that it has. And so if you're not regularly going out and testing and using your own product, you might be missing it. I don't know anybody who this week had LinkedIn's release multiple times glitched with like where its text was overlaid. And I thought, is anyone at LinkedIn actually using LinkedIn? Because I would see this. You know? So that's what I'd say. In addition, I mean, talk to your customers. It's probably totally right, but you know, and check to make sure your metrics are going in the right direction, that more people are signing up, staying on, all of that. But I mean, do something simple. Go use it.
Yeah. Have a great, not only just, you know, use your product, but also QA and test and DevSecOps and all the fun stuff there. That's good. I like that. Use your own product. Okay, great. So we have a next question here that just came up is at what stage should you involve developers in UX? Developers in UX. So Michael, you want to take that one?
Yeah.
What stage should you involve developers?
Yeah, so we involved them pretty early on, especially when you guys came on board and started interviewing. One of our architects was involved in the exact same interview process, using the product. They walked through it, and our architect was one of the original developers on the original admin console. And having your developers involved, at least in that interview process, gives the ability to say, you know, when you go to design something, when you design the UX, they can at least say, we don't even have that data right now, but now we can anticipate we might need to get it, so that to help drive that, the console to drive the data that's being displayed to the end user on that product. It allows the developers to not be, in essence, blindsided of this, hey, look what we have now, go do it. They've been a part of that process the whole time. And that doesn't mean the developer who's actually writing it, but at least from your dev organization at some level should be involved in that conversation pretty early on.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to tag on is, you know, you'd mentioned earlier with these interviews, one of the key things that worked very well for us is that you were a neutral party doing these interviews. You had no idea how the admin console works. You had no preconceived ideas how it should work, or if a person was doing something right or wrong. You just kind of sat over their shoulder. So when you're going into looking at the UX and how you want it, you know you have issues with your current system and you want to know where are the pain points. Having some neutral third party go in and kind of analyze it will help alleviate any, this is my boss sitting over my shoulder, and if I do something wrong, I'm gonna get in trouble or get dinged for it. Or this is someone else's boss high up in the chain, and you know, so having that third party, that neutral party, just taking the information in. And I think the other thing we've talked about a lot is that iterative feedback loop. That works for UX. You know, having short cycles. We met 2 or 3 times a week. You would present your findings, then it would have a follow-up as to what we wanted you to work on the next week. That feedback loop, whether it's within the product itself, it's in the design, it really has to be continuous. We have to get away from the old waterfall methodology of going off into a dark room, figuring it out, and then presenting it 3 months later, and you're like, we didn't want that at all.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's great. You know, Michael, I love working with developers, especially early on, because I learn things too, right? Because I can present your developer something, and they're like, "Whoa, no, like that's not gonna fly." And I'm like, "Okay, well, how about this alternative?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, that works." And in my head, they're both equal, but they're not. So
yeah, and there's a lot of context around the business that you might not have, which is a positive because you can really think outside the box of what we're doing. Whereas we're kind of set in our ways of how something should be working. We just, you know, it's the blinders are on. don't always see alternatives, and being able to explore some of those alternatives with the developers really helps that whole process grow.
Well, 100%. So we actually have a bunch of questions left, but we're at the top of the hour, and so actually a minute over. Sorry about that, audience members. We want to thank everyone for joining this webinar. Thank you, Sebastian, Heather, Michael. I really appreciate the discussion. I thought it was fun, and we could probably go on for another hour, but we want to make sure everyone gets back here today. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And if you have any questions for any of us, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.